Hello, welcome to another weekly live stream with yours truly, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. This is the fourth episode in my fall series on colorism in media. So if you haven't watched the first three episodes, you can definitely catch up. I think there's a link to the playlist in the caption. This week's episode, we are building on some of the things we talked about, especially in episode 2 where I talked about propaganda. And the title of this episode is, Are You Programmed by Your TV? Now I know just viscerally people are like, no, not me. I am not programmed by anything. It's really how we feel. We like to think we're in complete control, right? And of course, this title is a play on the idea of programming your TV, right? I don't know if people still program TVs these days, but when I was growing up, you would program your TV to record certain shows since we didn't have all that on-demand stuff. You could program your TV or you could program your VCR to record something. And you could program the remote, right? And so there's a lot, the idea of programming is often used when we're talking about TV, as well as the phrase TV programming. And I read on the internet, we see and hear a lot of things on the internet. There's this one phrase or this one statement that I've been hearing called, they don't call it programming for nothing. They don't call it TV programming for nothing, right? When you think about the phrase, oh, this is a TV program, a lot of times we just think, oh, it's a TV show or a broadcast. And we don't always stop to think about what that word means, right? What's implied when we say a TV program? And like I mentioned, we like to think we're in control because we have the remote control, but we've discussed a lot, and it is widely discussed by people in different fields, people who study human behavior, human psychology, of all the ways that we might be influenced. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of that. And again, episode 2, I really recommend, if you don't have time to watch all 3 episodes, I think episode 2 is most relevant to what we're talking about today, where I went through propaganda and how propaganda can be anything. Yes, TV commercials, but it could also be newspapers. Propaganda could be school curriculums, t-shirts, billboards, murals, radio broadcasts, songs, right? Like anything can be used as propaganda. And today I want to share some of the reasons why I think TV or television could be one of the strongest or most powerful forms of propaganda that we have, and why it's maybe unique to other things that have often been used as propaganda, okay? So before I really get into the heart of the matter, I like to say hello to y'all. I like to welcome you in. Be sure to introduce yourself if you're able to watch live and use the chat. So I know some people watch from their TV or that sort of thing. Let me know where you're from. Let me know if this is your first time joining me for a live. Let me know what your star sign is. I am a Gemini. I am so in love with Gemini energy. Hi, Michael. Michael wins the prize for always being the first one in the chat. Hey, Shayla. Hello. Elizabeth, welcome. Yes. Miss Me says, I like your haircut. Thank you, Miss Me. Okay, I'm loving my haircut. I'm showing a picture of myself where I had a similar haircut. And I think even though I've had similar haircuts in the past, there's something about the way Janice did this particular version of it that I think it's really flattering. So I appreciate that. And all of you who are also watching live or the recording, if you're watching the playback, there will be timestamps below, but I just want to let you know that I'm happy to have you here. We will leave time at the end for official discussion, official Q&A. I'll read your comments, read your questions, and respond to any of them that I can. But first, before we go further, I also want to share intentions. So I want to I am intentional, but I am intentionally sharing my intentions, right? Because I can set intentions behind the scenes, but for this series, like relaunching in the fall, I just felt like explicitly stating and articulating what my intentions for this episode and for this series are and have been. So the first, of course, is to have fun and to create connections real time. So yes, we interact in comments, many ways to interact online, often asynchronous, but I like being able to respond in real time and chat with y'all in the chat. The way you all interact with each other, you all respond to each other in the chat as well. So all of that is really fun and exciting to me. I'm also a geek, so I like learning and teaching. And then the second one is to go deeper, have conversations that not only are interesting, but that go beneath the surface, right? That peel back the layers of a lot of the things we take for granted in society. A lot of times when we're in these conversations, people will say, yeah, I need to pay more attention to that. Or, yeah, I don't usually think about it that way, right? And so it's just asking us to pay more attention to our lives, to pay more attention to what's happening around us. And people have different perspectives and philosophies. My philosophy is that everything matters, everything counts, it's all important, like no detail is too small. And so people think, oh, if I'm not being hit over the head with something, then it's not impacting me. But I think even subtle things, especially if they are frequent and if they recur consistently over an extended period of time, I definitely think that even little things, little messages can have a deep impact, deep and lasting impact on us. So yeah, not just looking at it like, oh, it's just a commercial, it's just entertainment, it's just a song, or, they're not talking about me, right? Like all these ways that people find to stay on the surface, to just skim on the surface and ignore how the media we consume and the media we create can contribute to real systemic issues. All right. The third intention is to facilitate healing and to facilitate transformation for us as individuals, but also hopefully the society. So as each one of us does our own work, hopefully it has ripple effects to those around us and to the larger world as well. So that's what I'm about. If any of that sounds good to you, if you're on board with that, then you're in the right place. Welcome, welcome. All right, let me check in on the chat just a little bit. Us Gemini are the finest. Michael, you a Gemini? Oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. Shayla is a Leo. Yes, I like Leos. And this is your first time. Woohoo! Yay! And I like that you're not being shy, even though it's your first time. All right, Kay Michelle. Yes. All right, so let me pull up the presentation. I've been incorporating my presentations these days. So my throwback picture from today is from 2013 when I actually worked in television. I forget that I did work for a local news TV station for a while. I did their online content though. I was never in front of the camera. I wasn't involved with like the TV production side of things, but I did social media and website stories and content and that sort of thing. But being in the newsroom, right? Like I was in the newsroom with all of the reporters and the anchors and the producers and would communicate with them about stories and videos and things like that. And I also got all the emails. So all of the emails that came through, I would see them. And so in episode 2, remember, if you haven't seen it, check out episode 2. I talked about one example of working in that news station for a few months. I was there for less than a year. We would see police reports coming through. And so the police reports, I noticed a pattern or a trend of police reports having photos attached if the suspect was Black, right? They were far more likely to include pictures of Black people if they were the person of interest, right? As opposed to if the person of interest or the suspect was white, it was like a toss-up as to whether or not they would have actually included a photo. And so I explained more about how that's relevant in terms of propaganda and things like that in episode 2. And so this is the picture I was saying how my haircut is similar, but it just doesn't have the same vibe. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's shaved on the sides, but it just looks different. Okay. And this was during Christmas, I think. And so that's why we're all in like red and green colors. All right. So with episodes going before, I talked about how propaganda can be anything. But there are a few reasons why I'm honing in on the question of, is the TV particular programming you? And to think about how the TV might do this, I want to start with the idea of how engaged we are with TV as opposed to other types of media, right? Like newspapers or even social media. If you are on YouTube, you might have participated in this survey. I took this screenshot earlier today, so the numbers might be slightly different if you go to it now. But in the survey, I asked people how they feel after watching TV. And so 50% of the people said they feel sleepy or lethargic, 5%, and only 22 people took the survey. Okay, so this is not at all representative of the US population. But 5% of people said happy or content. couple of people said sad, down, or irritable, and some others said other or unsure, right? And I actually voted on my own poll, and I said other or unsure. I think it just depends on what I'm watching, right? But paying attention to how we feel after we consume something, and that could be anything, whether it's TV, social media. When you close out your Instagram app, how do you feel? Do you feel better? Do you feel about the same? Are you like in dread? Are you feeling anxious, right? And so that can be a signal. That is a very strong signal that maybe our practice of consumption, the way we're consuming or what we're consuming might not be contributing to our mental health in a positive way, right? And so I'll do more polls like this. I think it's kind of interesting to engage you all and then bring it into the presentations. But aside from how we feel, I thought it was interesting that a lot of people said they feel lethargic or sleepy. And it could have a lot to do with maybe when you're watching TV. If you watch TV late at night, maybe you're inclined to be sleepy or lethargic. But there is the idea or the concept of hypnosis. Okay, so we're gonna get deep here. We're gonna talk a little bit about hypnosis. Let me make myself a little bigger. And there's this juxtaposition here that I thought of when I'm creating these presentations. I have fun doing it. I saw this stock photo up here. I don't know if you all can see my mouse, but the larger photo of this dark-skinned black man supposedly looking at a TV screen, right? Or looking at a screen and watching TV. And that's implied by the fact that he has popcorn, the blue light is shining on his face. And when I saw that stock photo, because I was like looking for pictures for my presentation, I immediately thought of Daniel Kaluuya's infamous still frame from the movie Get Out, the hypnosis scene. And I was like, ding, because I'm talking about hypnosis. Now, I'm not talking about hypnosis as in look directly into my eyes as I count backwards from 10, or like follow the pendulum, right? Those old school hypnosis videos where you like looking at the watch swing from left to right. I'm not talking about that kind of hypnosis. I'm talking more about the idea of being in a trance state or being in a hypnotic state, right? And so I'm not a psychologist. So feel free to, if you are a psychologist or have degrees in, psychotherapy, feel free to correct me in the chat if anything I say is less than accurate. But to summarize, I am going to rely on a couple of articles. And the first one is from Time Magazine, an article called How Hypnosis Works According to Science that was published in 2022. So the first thing we'll say about hypnosis is that not everyone is as susceptible to being hypnotized, right? Or to suggestibility. Sometimes you might use the words hypnotic or suggestibility as synonyms. They might be interchangeable a little bit. But they said that at least 2/3 of adults are suggestible, are susceptible to being hypnotized, right? And so if you don't know for sure that you aren't susceptible, then it's worth being cautious, right? It's worth guarding your unconscious mind. A second point is that the trance or the hypnotic state or the state of deep relaxation isn't particularly difficult for most people to dive into or emerge from. So I want to pause on that point because, again, the stereotype of hypnosis, we think it has to be this sensational process, right? Like I have to be on a couch and there has to be a pocket watch that someone's swinging in front of my face and they have to be intentionally trying to hypnotize me, right? But what scientists and psychologists are saying is that it's actually pretty easy to slip into that flow state, to slip into that trance-like state. And then they say it's similar to a flow state, Spiegel says, or an altered state of consciousness in which a person is so immersed in a given activity, their focus narrows and their sense of time shifts. Doesn't that sound like binge watching your favorite TV show? Oh my gosh, right? Like what is more hypnotic than that, right? What allows you to lose track of time besides binge watching a TV show or being immersed into a movie or a program? And then they say it's also reminiscent of what happens during meditation, okay? Except instead of training people to tune into the present moment, which is meditation, hypnosis makes them more receptive to suggestion. And that's, my friends, the power of television. So not only is television, by immersing us into the activity of the story, right? Putting us into this trance of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And we're crying with the characters. We're laughing with the characters, right? We're completely tuned in, engrossed in that activity. And instead of paying attention to our bodies or the present moment, we're actually becoming more open to suggestibility, right? And that's part of how we're able to follow along with the stories. The reason why we cry with our characters, the reason why we laugh with our characters, the reason why we get angry or scared is because of that suggestibility. Like that's precisely what makes watching TV so fun and engaging, okay? And then the last thing from the Times article is that it can be achieved in just a few minutes. So you think about binge watching a TV show. I've done it. And I would do it again. Okay, so I'm not knocking TV. I'm not knocking binge watching shows. We'll get to that part in a minute. But like there's a 10 episode series, like a mini series or something. And I'm like, I've looked across the couch at my mom. A lot of times we're like, let's just finish it. It's 3 a.m., but we're going to finish it. We only got 2 episodes left, right? So if we're spending that much time watching TV, watching movies, watching series, and we can enter into a hypnotic state or a trance-like state where we're highly suggestible in a mere matter of minutes, then imagine the power of being engrossed in a TV program for hours at a time has on our subconscious mind. The other thing I'll say too is, because again, some people resist the notion that something has an impact on them. And that's the very definition of subconscious, is that you're not aware of it. So yeah, consciously you're like, oh, that's not bothering me. That's not impacting me, because you're focusing on what you are consciously aware of. But the impact is happening at a subconscious level, meaning it's probably not perceptible, right? And in fact, if you are aware, sometimes that still can happen. You can still be suggestible or hypnotized even when you are aware that it's happening. And so then a second article that I'll quote from just quickly is a Binghamton University article where the psychologist says, however, people can respond to hypnotic suggestions even while they are alert and on an exercise bicycle. So even if you are not really engrossed in the TV program, even if you're cooking or doing something else, but the TV is on or the radio is on or there's a conversation happening in the next room, right? If you are in a state that is highly suggestible, you can still pick up on the messages that are around you, right? And so the key here that I want you to take away is that you don't have to feel like you're being hypnotized. I'll say that again. I know it's kind of loud around me, but hopefully the mic is reducing the background noise. So what I'll say is that you don't have to feel like you're being hypnotized to be hypnotized, right? And I know that, again, that's a scary word for people, but it just means that you're in like a flow state where you're really focused and engrossed on the activity you're doing, and therefore you become more suggestible when you're in that state. And then third or next, I don't know what number I'm on. I think I'm just doing 2. Another psychological principle is one of priming. And I told you I'm a geek, right? So I took psychology classes in college, and all these things just engrossed me. And so priming was one of the things I learned as an undergrad, and it stuck with me. And of course, I learned about all these psychological principles, and I applied them to things like racial bias. I applied them to things like, anti-Black racism and what happens when cops kill unarmed, innocent Black folks, or, sexist discrimination, or any of the, ills of society that folks in my circles and my networks tend to really advocate against. And so priming is another psychological term that is highly relevant to understanding the power of TV. And so what happens with priming is that exposure to one stimulus or exposure to one idea or image or word will influence, or it might influence, your response to a second image or a second piece of input, right? And so the priming effect refers to positive or negative. So you can be primed to believe something positive about a person. You can be primed to believe something negative or to perceive something negative. And it's the effect of rapidly presented stimulus on the processing of a second stimulus that appears shortly after, right? So a very simplistic example, I talk about something being really, really beautiful, right? I keep using words like beautiful and lovely and smart and nice and kind and soft and gentle, right? And then I show you a picture of myself. You're more likely to see that photograph as beautiful because that's what we've been talking about. We were just talking about that. So you think about something like a commercial that's talking about beautiful hair, shiny, luxurious hair. What are the images coming in rapid succession after that, right? And so with TV, this is something I heard a woman recently online talking about this, and I have no idea who she was. Okay, so I apologize, but I know that I don't know if I dreamed it. I just know I heard someone talking about TV versus like reading a book or reading a newspaper. And so although newspapers and novels and books can be forms of propaganda, when we think about the idea of rapid succession, what they were saying was with reading a newspaper or a book, you can control the pace of that, right? So you can stop mid-sentence in a newspaper or book and reflect. You're reading a newspaper, you read a sentence, and you're like, whoa, let me stop and think about that. I do this all the time when I'm reading, right? I'm like halfway through a paragraph, and I take the next 5 minutes to think about that sentence I just read. Or you put the book aside, you put the newspaper down, you go do something else, you come back to it later. And so when you're reading something, for example, yes, written material can be propaganda, but because you have some degree of control over the pacing of the information, then you have that space to insert a critical lens. You have that space for analysis. You have that space for counteracting and thinking about alternative ideas and perspectives. But with television, and this is similar with radio as well, but I think because television also has visual and auditory information, it's even worse, right? It's even more inundation with inputs and stimuli because it's both the visual and the auditory stimulus, is that it's image after image after image, right? Like literally second after second after second after second. It's a new image, a new word, a new sound, right? A new stimulus every second. The images are changing. And so there's no space when you're watching a movie or a TV show to stop and say, oh, that character just said a line. Let me sit with this for 10 minutes and think about it. And then I'll press play again, right? Like how many people actually watch TV like that? Most of us, myself included, just go along with the story. We're just going along with the movie, right? I'm not going to pause because I heard something problematic. Maybe I should though, right? Or maybe I don't even register it as problematic because I'm on to the next thing, because I'm on to the next idea, I'm on to the next piece of dialogue, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I say, although any type of media can be propaganda, TV and movies are particularly impactful. And even social media, right? Because social media gets a pretty bad rep, and understandably so. But even with social media, you can click out of it, right? If you see a post on social media, you can sit with that one post for 10 minutes. You can sit with that one post for 30 minutes and discuss it and look over to your friend and say, look at this post, right? So even with social media, there's a level of how you control the pacing. You don't have to just endlessly scroll. You can scroll slowly. You can close the app. You can pick it back up in an hour or two later, right? And it's just very different from the inundation, the bombarding of images and sounds, right? And just stimulation that's coming at you when you're watching TV. All right, so the idea of priming though, and this is a little bit beyond just the context of a TV, I want to give us some examples of how priming can happen verbally. And again, this could be the dialogue in a television program, but it also happens in police interrogations. So you'll see this, people who do research and study wrongful convictions. Ooh, I ain't gonna get into that, right? That hits a little too close to home. But the way that cops can force confessions, right? Or make people, or force eyewitness testimony, right? Like misremembering eyewitness testimony. Some of that can happen just because our brains as human are imperfect, right? Like rarely do we remember a scene exactly as it happened unless you have photographic memory. But then you add on our imperfect memory with intentional manipulation during the interrogation process, and you have people being convicted left and right who had no associations with the crime whatsoever. So an example of how this could happen verbally, right? You have a phrase like, "Did you see Donald at the house?" Right? That's kind of a neutral phrase. But then you change the wording just a little bit and you say, "Did you see Donald at the scene of the crime?" So now you're like, oh my gosh, is Donald a criminal? Did Donald commit a crime? Oh my gosh, right? And so that slight change in wording can prime someone to see someone as guilty or see someone as a suspect. And then you switch it up a little bit more and you say, "Did you see the suspect, Donald, at the scene of the crime?" And suddenly a person who would never associate Donald with crimes is all of a sudden starting to think, well, maybe Donald did commit the crime. He's a suspect, right? And yes, I'm using the name Donald intentionally. I mean, no surprises there. And then go even further, right? If you listen to some interrogations or you watch an interrogation video, if a cop is saying this, right? "Donald is a known criminal with a dangerous track record and multiple arrest warrants. Did you see him at the scene of the crime?" Right? And so you can prime people, and people can try to do it to us as well. And then I'm telling y'all, so we might be thinking like, oh, but I would catch that. But that's so obvious. Not if you're in an interrogation room and you're 17 years old and you're scared for your life, right? And so heightened stressful situations, again, can increase our suggestibility, can lower our cognitive functioning, right? Because we're in survival mode. And so these things can be really insidious and really dangerous. And they definitely, all these psychological principles definitely come to bear on things like racism and violence against marginalized groups, right? Okay, so let's continue. The thing I want to say though is that we are not powerless. We are not merciless against these things. But the issue is that people assume it is easy, right? Or I just have to think that I'm infallible. I have to think that I'm invincible, right? But really, we can also prime ourselves for positive things. We can practice catching things. We can train our minds. We can train our eyes. We can train our ears to hear problematic things. We can train our eyes and our ears to see the nuances of portrayals of what's being said, of what's not being said, right? We can practice these things. And so that's my goal with this series, is not just to complain about media or vent about what's wrong with it, but for us to really understand like, okay, this is what's wrong. How do we respond from a place of agency, from a place of self-empowerment, right? And collective organization when necessary, right? And then in terms of the hypnotic state, the last thing I'll say is what happens when you're falling asleep with the TV on. Ooh, because we all do that, right? We all do that. So again, unlike reading a book or reading a newspaper, where if you're sleeping, you're not reading, right? But if the TV is on or the radio is on, even though you're sleeping, you can still be receiving input. You can still be receiving, on some level, suggestions. You can still be suggestibility. And there's this connection between when you're awake, then you can actually offer a counterpoint. When you're awake, you can turn it off. When you're awake, you can lower the volume. When you're awake, you can ask questions, right? And so, yeah, you're receiving input when you're awake, but when you're asleep, not only are you receiving that input, but then you have no recourse to respond to it, right? So it's just flowing through your subconscious unimpeded. And that's fine, right? Like, I like to fall asleep to YouTube videos. I like to fall asleep to podcasts, but I fall asleep to ones that I choose, right? If you're choosing a podcast to fall asleep to, you can choose whose voice you're listening to. Whereas television, and this is what I'm saying, television, especially if you don't have like a paid subscription where you don't see ads, then you have less control over what's coming on next. Especially if you're watching like live TV, commercials, other programming that you might not have anticipated that's coming on and playing while you're sleeping. That's input, types of suggestions, and you don't know what it is. You don't know what's actually being said on that television while you're sleeping, right? And again, that's different from like falling asleep to your favorite movie, right? So yeah, we can fall asleep to media, but that's when we need to be even more aware of what we're allowing ourselves to fall asleep to or wake up to. And aside from the psychological question, we're going to veer into a little bit here the programming in terms of who sets the curriculum, who sets the program. So something that is a program is programmed by someone, by something, by some entity. And so who's the entity? Who are the entities that decide what is the program, right? And that's when it starts to get a little veering to the power dynamics that we're going to get into next week. And so there's this illusion of choice. I know I keep comparing TV to social media, but I will say that as much as we complain about algorithms on social media, the very existence of this live stream on YouTube, to me suggests that we still have, as problematic as it is, we still have far more choice on social media than we do on mainstream TV networks or mainstream streaming platforms, right? Because I can be here talking to you on YouTube, but you're not going to see me on HBO, at least not yet, right? You're not going to see me on CBS. You're not going to see me on NBC. You're not going to see me on Amazon, Hulu, right? Netflix. I'm not on those platforms. Why? Because of the gatekeeping, because of the high barriers to entry, right? And so as much as the algorithms limit what we can see and what we don't see online, on websites, on the internet, on social media, even that level of filtering and control doesn't compare to the level of filtering and control that is mainstream entertainment, right? Who gets played on the radio, right? I was in this conversation about supporting dark-skinned singers and supporting dark-skinned rappers and dark-skinned music artists. And I'm saying, but if the radios aren't playing those people, how are they discoverable, right? So they're already less discoverable. It's harder to discover dark-skinned musicians if they're not being played on the radio, right? And so we have to also look at who is deciding what's even available, right? Who sets the menu of TV shows? Who sets the menu of movies that are available for us to find, okay? And that brings me to what we're talking about next week. We're going to get into the chat. I got your opportunities for growth and reflections coming up. But I have to plug next week because next week I'm bringing on my auntie, Cheryl Bedford. She's not my real auntie. You know, she's like our collective auntie. But Cheryl Bedford, if you don't already know her, is an industry insider, right? She works in Hollywood, but she is also a very fierce, powerful advocate for women of color in Hollywood. She helps women of color get jobs. She helps women of color fund their projects. She helps women of color make sure their projects and their work in the entertainment industry actually gets seen, right? So she's actually doing the work in that industry. And Cheryl is especially special because she was one of the line producers for the documentary Dark Girls. Okay, yes. So I met Cheryl for the first time in person at the Colorism in Hollywood panel that we did in February. And so she agreed to join me live next week for the episode on puppet strings and purse strings, who's really calling the shots behind the scenes, okay? So I told y'all I don't work in entertainment. The little 9 months I worked at the local TV news station does not compare to someone who has training and education and a long track record of actually being in Hollywood and working on movies and projects. So that's why I'm calling in the expertise for next week. So it's not just going to be me making assumptions about what happens in Hollywood. It's not just going to be me speculating or theorizing like, oh, I think this is how decisions get made. So we'll have someone who actually has partaken in that process many times themselves to really shed light for the rest of us who may not know. And I know I have lots of followers who also work in the industry. So if you all are watching and you want to send additional insights and perspectives, please do that. All right. So let me get to your reflection question for today, which is how can I be more intentional about what I'm consuming? So pretty straightforward reflection question this week, right? How can I be more intentional about what I'm consuming? And then our opportunity for growth and transformation, if you would like to do a little extra work, is to try a media detox, right? So set a period of time where you are turning off X. It could be turning off your phone, turning off the YouTube. Don't turn off YouTube yet. Wait till we're done here. Turning off the TV, turning off the radio. I don't know if I'm going to turn off my music, y'all. I'm being honest. I don't know if I would ever do a music fast. I've done TV fast, movie fast. I don't know if I could ever do a music fast. Maybe for like a day. All right. But also, again, being aware of not just are you watching something, but what are you watching, how often, and then how are you watching it? We're going to get to that question more explicitly later on. But it's not just like, oh, I can't watch these things. It's like, am I watching these things with a critical lens? Am I being self-reflective as I watch this or after I watch it? Do I go back and say, how do I feel about this line of dialogue? Or how do I feel about the lack of this type of representation, right? And so your affirmation is, I consume responsibly. Yes, I consume responsibly, okay? And with that, let's get to the chat, folks. I know some of y'all have probably already been chatting, so I gotta catch up a little bit. Type your questions and comments in the chat, and we will get to them. Wait, I didn't mean to do that. So let's see. We have Shayla says, just listen to a song where the rapper was rapping about how he loves red bones. See, you hear it. Now you hear it. There's people go through phases based on what they've told me. They go through phases where they don't even hear the stuff. And then all of a sudden, when they have that shift in awareness and consciousness, it's like, oh my gosh, I hear it all the time. I can't stop seeing it. People have said after watching my videos, they're like, I can't stop seeing colorism. It just takes a little light switch. I remember in architecture school, they said, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? You see it everywhere now. Miss Me says, yes, Shayla, the music is awful. I can't even listen to it anymore. And I used to love rap music. Kentillis says, my sister loves watching reality TV, dating shows, and she said she likes watching it with me because I actually will have so much to say that pausing will be necessary. Okay, this is good. I put this on the screen so people can read it. I like that. And so, Kentillis, that's exactly what I was just talking about when I said it's not just what you watch, it's how you watch it, right? So it's not that we can't watch anything. But maybe we start to look at our favorite types of programming and we watch them differently. Maybe we watch them with a friend who's going to see things that we're not going to see. You know, like if you have that friend who always notices stuff that you don't notice, like start watching things with them to help you raise your awareness and increase your sensitivity to these things, right? I like that. Michael says, yes, I saw Donald there on January 6th. You understood the assignment, Michael. Donald was on the TV. He was at the White House. He was all up in the scene of the crime, okay? K. Michelle says, oh, excited for Cheryl. This is about to be good. Yeah, and Cheryl does not hold back, okay? Y'all think I don't hold back. Cheryl will tell it like it is, okay? And just in our email exchange and me inviting her on the show, she's just constantly like blowing my mind. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. Oh my, all the veil has been lifted, right? And so I'm excited for y'all to meet her as well. Kay Michelle says, deaf can't unsee, just pretty much angry all the time now, like the Hulk, LOL. But anger is a good motivation. Yeah, anger is a good motivation. And as long as you're channeling that anger to act, right? And not, because I think I tell this to Black women a lot in like healing spaces, because there's this conversation about like anger. And I think for so many Black women, our anger can sometimes be turned on us. And that's what I want my sisters to understand. It's not like I'm like, don't be angry, right? But I just know so often in our histories and our families as Black women, that anger has become self-destructive. And we haven't collectively, I think, learned how, or individually, maybe we haven't learned how to take that anger and actually apply it to the thing that needs to be destroyed, right? And because it's not us, right? A lot of times we are being self-destructive. And people have, so I like that there are more conversations about how depression, anxiety, anger, sadness shows up differently for Black women than it might for people of other races and genders and other types of identities. And so, yeah, I think that's for a deeper conversation as well, is what does anger mean? What can anger do for us? And as Black women in particular, because I care about us so much, especially us dark-skinned ones, is how can we make sure that that anger is not eating us alive from the inside, right? Like, that's my concern for us. All right, folks. So thank you for joining me. I'm at the end of the chat. I am excited about next week. I always like interviewing people because I do less talking. But come with your questions, come with your commentary. Definitely come with your questions, because I know a lot of my folks are also like really wanting to know what happens behind the scenes, right? Miriam B. She said, how your auntie can survive in Hollywood. It is the jungle over there. I am curious to see how she is doing this work in a wild capitalist and racist space. How does she keep integrity? Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll let her answer. I'll let her answer those questions. So if you can come back live, if you can join us again live next week and pose those questions directly to her, I think that's the best route to take. All right. So don't forget your affirmation, I consume responsibly. And part of consuming responsibly just might be, I'm just saying, to share this live stream with somebody who needs to see it and hear it. Share this whole series with your folks, okay? And I'll see y'all next time. Much love and take